So my name is Ben Edgerly Walsh. I run the Climate and Energy Program here at VPIRG.
I'm Johanna Miller. I run the Climate and Energy Program at the Vermont Natural Resources Council.
So I'm going to turn it over to Joey in just a second to give a little bit more of the history of this effort to price carbon pollution here in Vermont and to start in on a presentation that will be sort of trading off. And then obviously we're going to take some real time and get to your questions as they come in. I should note that we'll do our best to get to all the questions that you're asking us, as well as potentially a few others, depending on how much we're seeing from you all that we've gotten over the last couple of weeks as this plan rolled out and we started fielding questions from the public on it. But unfortunately, no promises that we'll be able to get to every single question. The last thing I'll note is this presentation that you're about to see was built on a presentation done originally by Ashley Orgain of 7th Generation, who announced this plan formally a couple of weeks ago at an energy and climate conference up in Burlington. So this is a little bit of an expanded presentation, and again, it was built on a presentation that Ashley did. So we're going to do our best to present it to you all, and then again answer your questions on this plan.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Getting a few notes about having a trouble hearing, but I hope that is better. And I'm just going to provide a little context, and then we're going to show the go through a presentation, so you're not going to see our mugs anymore. Lucky you. But so yeah, many of you are well aware that there has been an important conversation underway in the state of Vermont for a while now that is looking at what the state can do to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions and make progress on our climate and clean energy goals. Carbon pricing, putting a price on heating and transportation fuels has been part of that conversation and an important part. And my organization, the Vermont Natural Resources Council, VPIRG, business organizations like 7th Generation, low-income advocates, faith leaders, and others have been really digging into what the state can do to dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This is an exciting new proposal that we're excited and looking forward to walking through with you tonight that actually is meant to build off Vermont's unique assets. So we really appreciate you joining us this evening. We're going to walk through the presentation and then we will take your questions and answers. If you write in your questions, we can view them here and try our best to answer them. As well as Ben noted, we've gotten several questions from folks of late, and we will also try to answer those as well. So we will move right now to the presentation. You can. Okay. So as Ben mentioned, recently at a climate and energy summit that was in Burlington on November 8th that was focused on inviting big ideas that will really move the ball in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, the ESSEX Plan was rolled out. And the ESSEX Plan is intended to do exactly what we have been talking about, which is dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's an economy strengthening strategic energy exchange. I'm going to give you the broad view, and in a few, Ben is going to walk through the details. But the basics of the plan are to deliver clean electricity at the lowest rates in the region, provide a substantial boost for working class and rural Vermonters, and importantly, play an essential role in cutting Vermont's carbon pollution. Not a singular role, but an essential role. We're going to get into more detail on that in just a moment. The long and the short of it, there are over 60 nations and jurisdictions across the world that have instituted carbon pricing. This plan, like every other plan worldwide, is uniquely situated to serve the state of Vermont well. As many of you know, there are many nations that have instituted carbon pricing. Vermont is a state. This plan is still put together to actually serve Vermont in the state very, very well. So ideally, we would institute a national price on carbon pollution, but considering, as you all are well aware, we have a president of the United States and an administration that denies the science of climate change. So clearly, any significant movement on doing something substantive at the federal level is off the table for the foreseeable future. Advancing, solutions regionally is also extremely important. Those conversations are underway, and we are participating in those conversations. But we're also really eager to talk to you about and get you excited about this uniquely beneficial plan for the state of Vermont. So we're looking at, over the 60 nations and jurisdictions that have put a price on carbon pollution and are seeing and feeling the benefits of that, doing exactly what carbon pricing is intended to do, which is reduce greenhouse gas emissions that are driving climate change and adding significant economic benefit to their nation and their jurisdictions. So how does our plan work? It puts a price on carbon pollution, a gradually rising price on heating and transportation fuels. Our proposal is to start small at $5 a ton and gradually rise to $40 a ton. $5 a ton is important because that's the price that we pay to participate in the regional greenhouse gas emissions. That means that's what our electric sector is paying to pollute, essentially. This proposal would start at the very same small basis and gradually rise to $40 a ton. $40 a ton is important because it's also what the Obama administration, their Environmental Protection Agency, approximated was the social cost of carbon pollution. So starting at $5 a ton on heating and transportation fuels and gradually rising to $40 a ton. And what that equates to about at the gas pump is at $5 a ton, that's about 4.5 cents a gallon. At $40 a ton, that's about 35 to 36 cents a gallon. So gradually rising. So when over the course of 8 years, gradually rising to $40 a ton. And really importantly and really excitingly, taking all of the dollars raised from that price on carbon pollution and driving all of those dollars into slashing electric rates for all Vermonters. So again, the proposal is to put a gradually rising price on the things that we want to reduce, which is our fossil fuel use in the heating and transportation sectors, and putting those dollars into driving down the costs that Vermonters are paying on their electric bills. So, which is also intended to spur and accelerate the transition that the state is already making in terms of strategic electrification and helping Vermonters invest in the clean, renewably powered electricity solutions that we now have at our fingertips.
One other note that I'll make that I know went into consideration on that $40 price, that's also the price per ton that a number of legislators in other states in the Northeast, I believe New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, are looking at in their carbon pricing legislation as well.
So the ultimate goal is to get to some of the lowest electric rates in the region. The average Vermont ratepayer, when this proposal in about the mid-20s, would see their electric bills reduced on average by about 27%. And those very images you see there are the very kinds of technologies and clean energy resources that we hope and imagine and believe that this kind of innovative proposal could help spur. More and more Vermonters are investing in solar. They're getting, they're using clean modern wood heat to heat their homes and buildings. They're innovating, and this, as are our electric utilities. And this proposal is designed to support, build from, and accelerate that transition. So again, the average Vermont ratepayer would see about a 27% rate reduction by the mid-2020s. And this is, again, a proposal that is designed to build off of Vermont's unique assets. As you likely are well aware, we have pretty forward-looking utilities. We have some of the, we have one of the cleanest electricity portfolios in the nation. 2 of our utilities are 100% renewable at this moment. Many of them under our renewable energy standard are moving significantly towards a far more clean, distributed, renewable portfolio. This proposal is intended to build off that, complement that, and support and accelerate the transition to clean electricity. So how this proposal interacts with our innovative renewable energy standard is really important and exciting. I'm going to turn it over to Ben now, who's going to get into a little bit more detail as we talk about the Vermont energy context and into the details of the nitty-gritty, which clearly matters.
Thanks, Joey. So I just wanted to talk a little bit more about our electric sector in particular, since that's, I would say, more than half of what the ESSEX Plan is about. So throughout our organizations and the Energy Independent Vermont coalitions work on carbon pricing dating back several years now, all of the various proposals that we've supported have exempted the electric sector from that price on carbon pollution. There have been a few reasons why, and this plan, it seems to me, really builds on those, and as one advocate I was talking to recently said, takes advantage of our advantages. So in Vermont, we have spent a lot of time and policy bandwidth moving the electric sector in the right direction. Now, are we where we need to ultimately end up? No, absolutely not. I'd be the first to admit that. However, we are in a better place than nearly any other state in the nation. We started back now almost 2 decades ago with the first energy efficiency utility in the nation. This is still 17 years later, 17 years after the founding of Efficiency Vermont, considered an innovative model that not that many states have been able to replicate. And because of Efficiency Vermont's work, we're using 13% less electricity than we otherwise would be, and Vermont ratepayers are going to save, just due to the investments that Efficiency Vermont has already made, in the neighborhood of $500 million. So we have substantially cut our energy use in the electric sector. Does that mean that we should stop? No, absolutely not. We, both of our organizations, are huge supporters of energy efficiency and continued funding on that front. But it's certainly a strength that we have now. We're in the top 10 per capita for both solar and wind in the country. As Joey mentioned, we have electric utilities that have already made substantial progress towards where we ultimately need to go, which is 100% renewable electricity. And more to the point, that isn't just out of sort of quote-unquote the goodness of these utilities' hearts. We actually now, as of passage in 2015, and this law went into effect at the beginning of this year, a renewable energy standard on the books in Vermont that legally requires all electric utilities today to provide 55% renewable electricity to Vermont ratepayers, and that percentage ramps up to 75% by 2032. Now, there are ways that law could be better, could get more new renewables built here in Vermont than it does, although it's fairly substantial on that front as well. And of course, it ultimately needs to go to 100%. 75% is not the end goal in our electric sector or any of the parts of our energy use. And then finally, as Joey already mentioned, we are part of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative that already puts a price on carbon pollution in the electric sector in New England. That price, as she also noted, is a fairly low one that ultimately, hopefully, will increase, but that is definitely in the mix. So let me talk briefly about how this would actually work on your electric bill. So again, as Joey mentioned, all of the revenue from this, from the charge on carbon pollution in Vermont, would be put into rebates in the electric sector. Most of that money would go directly to reducing the functional rate that Vermonters and Vermont businesses are paying for the electricity they're using. They're also, very importantly, in the residential sector, and I'll get into more about how this breakdown works in a second, but in the residential sector, rural Vermonters and low and moderate income Vermonters would receive an additional rebate every month. So you've got a fairly typical Vermont ratepayer here with a basic example, of what a utility bill would look like, an electric bill would look like. This Vermonter is actually paying a little bit less than your average. It's typically right around $100 and 600 kilowatt hours. So this is a fairly typical Vermont ratepayer. They're paying $91.74 today. Under this plan, and this again, these calculations are in sort of the quote-unquote peak year, which would be in the mid-2020s, depending on when a law like this was passed. For every kilowatt hour they're using, they are getting $2.76 cents back. So this is important to note that the kilowatt hour charge is separate from the climate rebate, the per kilowatt hour rebate that everyone's receiving. So when we say the lowest functional electric rates in New England, that's what we're talking about. This would not technically change the rate of electricity, but it would, for every kilowatt hour that you use and buy from your utility, provide you an equivalent rebate. So again, as Joey mentioned, the average ratepayer across all of the sectors would see about a 27% rate reduction by the mid-2020s under this. If this Vermonter were a low or moderate income Vermonter, they'd also be seeing an additional rebate every single month. And this rebate, the low income rebate, is not under this plan based on the per kilowatt hour usage. It's based on income level. And this particular bill was calculated for somebody at about 200% of the federal poverty level. Obviously, when legislators if they decide to put this in legislation, they can choose what the low income rebate would look like. But these calculations were done having some kind of a rebate up to about 400% of federal poverty, or I believe that's around $80,000 a year for a family of four. Don't quote me, that's not a precise number, but in that neighborhood. And then finally, a rural rebate for all rural Vermonters. Again, this is something that, as legislation on this is looked at, you could define a number of different ways. But this particular model would be about a $14 per month rebate for every rural Vermonter. And at the end of the day, this Vermonter gets their bill cut roughly in half. So we're going to get into a few more details in a minute, but one important benefit of this proposal is that it essentially, if you're talking about price on carbon pollution, one of the key benefits of that is it's actually taking fossil fuels and ensuring that their price takes into account the damage that they're causing to our climate. And so that's this top part here. The cost of polluting fossil fuels is going up because of any price on carbon pollution. This plan, however, also reduces the price of clean electricity. And again, we say clean electricity because in Vermont, our electricity is fairly clean and legally required to get cleaner over time. And so if you're a Vermonter who's considering, you have an oil or propane or gas, what have you, furnace right now, and you're thinking about, for example, a cold climate heat pump, what this plan does is it actually drives down the price of operating a cold climate heat pump or an electric vehicle or an electric school bus or any efficient, electric technology. And so this actually has twice the quote-unquote price signal of an equivalent price on fossil fuels that didn't drive down the cost of one of the primary alternative fuels, clean electricity. So how is this revenue broken down? This is a really important provision of this proposal. The rebate share by sector, residential, commercial, and industrial, is the same as that sector pays in. So in Vermont, roughly speaking, residential ratepayers, that is to say homeowners, households, pay about half of the energy dollars in the heating and transportation sectors. And so under this plan, they get half of the revenue put into the 3 rebates I described on the bill a minute ago. Commercial customers pay about 31% of those energy dollars and would get 31% of the revenue back as a per kilowatt hour rebate on their electric bills. And then finally, industrial customers pay about 19% and would get about 19% back, again, as a per kilowatt hour rebate on their electric bills. So in the industrial and commercial sectors, there's really one thing going on here on electric bills. All of the revenue in those 2 sectors is plowed right back into a per kilowatt hour rebate. In the residential sector, as we noted a minute ago, there's a little bit more going on. So let me talk about that briefly. So that 2.76 cents that I mentioned a minute ago on the bill, that is this 50% here. So this block chart, I guess, as it were, is all of that revenue in the residential sector. So this block here, that 50%, this is what's going on within that 50%. Half of that 50% is going into a per kilowatt hour rebate that every single Vermonter sees on their electric bill. 25% of that revenue is going into that rural rebate that's divided across all rural Vermonters on a flat basis every month. And then 25% of that revenue is going into a low income rebate, which again would be going not based on kilowatt hours, but to low and moderate income Vermonters every month based on their income level. And again, if you have any questions about how all of this works, type them into the chat. We'll do our best to get to all of them. Okay, a few additional details. I'm going to turn it back over to Joey to close us out, and then we can get to your questions. So, a few exemptions that are worth noting. One, electric generation. Again, we just talked about this, but we have a renewable energy standard, and those fuels are already priced through the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. 2, aviation fuels, so jet fuel essentially. This is strictly federal preemption. It'd be really tough to try to tax those in this way, or put a charge on them or a fee on them at the state level. And finally, dyed diesel. So this is off-road diesel, the kind of diesel that is used, for instance, in farm equipment. So at this time, there are not, generally speaking, ready alternatives the way there are in most of the rest of the heating and transportation sector. And so this plan exempts dyed diesel. Despite those 3 exemptions, this still covers nearly all of the fossil fuel use in the heating, transportation, and industrial sectors. A couple more things. One, programs in Vermont that right now, like Efficiency Vermont, net metering, the energy assistance program that Green Mountain Power runs, all of those would still be based on the underlying retail rate of electricity. So if you recall how we had the per kilowatt hour rebate as a separate line item that was negative on that bill, that's actually fairly important, because it means that for Efficiency Vermont's work or for net metering customers, the world still essentially operates the same way for them. They're not basing it on a new rate. The price would only apply to fossil fuel portion of a particular fuel. So if you had a B50 biodiesel blend, that would only be taxed or would only have a charge at about half of that rate. And finally, if a Vermonter's electricity bill goes below 0 under this plan, any ESSEX rebates would be returned to that individual through a check from their utility. So the utilities are actually holding this money in escrow and are a pass-through. So that's fairly important in 2 main scenarios. One, net metering customers, primarily folks who have gone solar. If you are a net metering customer, current or future, and in a given month your electric bill goes below 0, not for your net metering piece, that's still a credit. You can't get a check for that. But for the ESSEX rebate, you could get a check up to the total value of your ESSEX rebate in a given month. Similarly, for low income and rural Vermonters, especially ones who are using a fairly small amount of electricity, they may actually get their electric bill below zero, in which case, again, they would get a check from their electric utility.
Okay, back to me. Thanks, Ben. And before we get, this is the last slide, I just want to talk about how this plays a really meaningful role in actually reducing the greenhouse gas emissions that we're producing here in the state of Vermont. We're getting a lot of questions. We'll do our best to try and answer them. And again, just appreciate you guys staying tuned in and caring so much. So the long and the short of it, as you are very well aware, the state has for over a decade had a statutory goal on the books to dramatically reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We missed the 2012 goal entirely. The actuals are not pretty, and in fact, where we're going is less pretty. Right now, the trend line has us falling far short of our greenhouse gas emission goals, which, as you are rightly aware, the primary reason we're putting this policy forward and wanting to explore it with legislators and concerned Vermonters and business leaders is to figure out how do we do our part to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, take action on climate, and turn it into the tremendous economic development opportunity it is in a way that works for everyone. So this policy is designed to change that trend line. Clearly, a big gap in terms of where we need to go and where we're going. And this policy, as you can tell, the ESSEX forecast is intended to change it. Again, not a singular policy. You will also notice that we're going to have to do far more, but a potentially powerful and meaningful policy, one of the most efficient and effective policies there are to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and move us off of the polluting fossil fuels that have powered our lives to date. So the ESSEX forecast, and again, this is just a forecast because we have yet to do a full-scale economic analysis of that, which is going to be essential and required. The ESSEX forecast, as you can see here, dramatically reduces greenhouse gas emissions. It's an estimate that is approximated from both the state's total energy study, which looked at how the state of Vermont can achieve its 90% by 2050 renewable energy goal, as well as built upon an analysis, an independent economic analysis by the Regional Economic Models, Inc., REMI, which does economic modeling for states across the nation and did an economic analysis of the carbon pricing proposal for Vermont a few years ago. And so this is the approximate greenhouse gas emission reduction trend line that the ESSEX policy and proposal could ultimately create. So again, this is meant to be one powerful but not singular policy. There is much more to do to continue to achieve greenhouse gas emission reduction results. But we're going to need to be putting a far more creative portfolio of solutions together that are also designed to meet other goals and objectives and fill in the gaps where this policy falls short. So I also just would say, as you probably are well aware, there are a lot of efforts afoot right now to actually have a serious conversation about changing that trend line. Among them is the creation of a climate action commission that Governor Scott put together this summer. Governor Scott charged the Climate Action Commission with coming up with recommendations on policies and programs, but largely policies that will actually change that trajectory and set us on a path to achieving the greenhouse gas emission goals that that he and others have embraced, also setting us on a trajectory to meet our 90% renewable by 2050 goal. So there are a lot of questions left to answer, and it is our hope that the legislature takes a hard look at this policy, taking a hard look at potentially other policies, but policies that are commensurate with the challenge that we have before us. And this proposal, again, as Ben has articulated and what we're excited to discuss with you, is that this idea is intended to build off our assets, to take advantage of the clean electric portfolio we have, and to help Vermonters gradually but meaningfully begin to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and invest in the kinds of clean energy solutions that are now available to us and that will take a significant chunk out of the greenhouse gas emissions that we are collectively emitting. So we are getting a lot of questions. We had a lot of questions before, and we're going to do our best to answer them. So we're going to move into the question and answer mode now.
And just so folks know, we're going to keep the slides up in case we need to refer back to them. So unfortunately, the last time you saw our faces is going to be the beginning of the presentation. But we both have bios on our websites in case you want to look us up again.
And just to underscore that this is the beginning of a conversation and digging into this policy with you and others. So as Ben noted, we're looking forward to continuing to talk to you and others about what we can be doing in a meaningful way, including advancing and fairly exploring this policy. So somebody, already asked this question, and it's clearly as advocates who've been advancing and promoting the transition to, clean electric options, including solar. Someone asked how it will work for existing solar customers. Ben touched on that, but if you can go into a little bit more detail, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is definitely a question that came up 2 or 3 times in the chat, and it's a really important one to understand. It is actually baked into this proposal. So the 2 important things to know here: one, if you are a net metering customer and your bill, because of your net metering credit in a given month, is at or below 0, and that's a situation that lots of folks find themselves in, at least for some months of the year, in the middle of the summer when your system's really cranking, then you will get a check back for up to the total value of the ESSEX credit that you're getting that month. So this plan would not change anything about the fact that as a net metering customer, you can't get a check from your utilities for your net metering credit itself. That's to do with federal law and is really unrelated to this proposal. But you could for the ESSEX rebate. And just to be clear, this is something that has come up in some questions we've gotten over email recently as well. You would be getting a per kilowatt hour rebate based on your total electricity usage, not your net usage. So every solar customer has a production meter and a usage meter. It'd be based on your total usage, just like every other customer in the state. The other thing that's important to know is for most net metering customers, they're going to be getting, right now, you're getting the retail rate plus some number, plus some additional solar adder. And that would remain the same under this plan because the bill credit is, I'm going to just scroll back to the bill here. Because the bill credit is a separate line item and the money is actually held in escrow by the utilities, this rate in this example, and I think this might be GMP's rate, but it's not, this would be true for any utility, you'd still be getting this 14.84 cents per kilowatt hour of solar produced plus your solar adder, and then your negative 2.76 cents per kilowatt hour would be totally separate from that. So that's not coming off of the top of your solar credit. That's still calculated the same way.
If you could stay on that slide, actually. A few other questions while this slide is up. Somebody asked, define rural Vermonters. Who is a rural Vermonter? Well, that definition is exactly still to be determined, but we looked at, this policy is sort of starting from the definition of rural Vermonter that the Vermont Energy Investment Corporation used for its latest energy burden report. And we don't have a photo of that slide and the information, the details related to it that you may very well be seeking, but that is still a question to be answered precisely. But there are different definitions of rural Vermonters that that we'd be pulling from. that and the starting premise for this particular policy is built off of the VEIC model. And I would also just say, while I'm answering that question, that there is a pretty robust plan that over a dozen academics, business leaders, economists, low-income advocates put forward that goes into far more details about this policy proposal, and that's something that we can share with you all because we now have, I believe, your contact information from signing on to this webinar. So when we follow up, we'll make sure that you have access to this webinar, but also that far more in-depth plan that will, I think, answer some of the questions that you are rightly asking. A few more things I just answer before we get into a couple more meaty questions. The cents per gallon impact at the gasoline pump in the out years at $40 a ton would be approximately 35 to 36 cents additionally at the pump. And then another person asked who administers and what is the approximate cost of that. As Ben noted, and as we've been trying to articulate, that this policy is intended to be built off of our existing infrastructure and pretty easy to administer, thereby not having too significant of a cost. So with all the dollars raised going into an escrow account at our utilities, they could then just take that financial benefit, monetize it, and pass it on to their three customer classes: the residential, commercial, and industrial customer classes. So
while Joey's picking the next question, let me also note, and again, we'll send this around to you all, but if you're interested in pulling up, even right now, if you'd like, the full 12, 15, something like that page description of this plan, that was also released a couple of weeks ago at that conference I mentioned. It is on 7th Generation's website. It's hosted on 7th Generation's website. I'm not sure exactly how you find it on their site, but I can say for sure that if you go to energyindependentvt.org, again, that organization, or that coalition that VPIRG and VNRC are part of, one of the first news items on that site is a little bit more about Ashley's presentation. And at the bottom of that item, if you click through to that news item, you'll see a link to the PDF of the full, more detailed plan. So again, we're going to try to get to as many questions as we can in the next 10, 15 minutes, but a lot of these details are also in there.
And several of you have been raising questions relating to how this policy might discourage folks from conserving energy and, undercut our shared commitment to energy efficiency. Again, something that is of concern for us. So in terms of what this policy would do to discourage folks from conserving, it's a legit issue. It's really important to keep investing in efficiency. We need to be, being really vigorous on pursuing appliance efficiency standards. Folks like Chris Grand, I know, have been leading on that. And then also, as we electrify, the goal is to encourage people to have less total energy use. This policy is not designed to, make electricity so, too cheap to meter. That is not going to happen. This policy is intended to be a transition to more clean, renewably powered heating and transportation solutions. And again, it's a gradual evolution intended to build off of existing programs like our innovative renewable energy standard. And we need to be continuing to pursue and find ways to help Vermonters, in particular our low-income friends and neighbors, to make their homes far more efficient and comfortable. So believe me, it is an issue that we are thinking about and will be vigilant in terms of addressing. But the goal is to reduce the pie in total and retain our commitment to dramatic energy efficiency savings.
Two things I'd add to that. So one, Joey mentioned appliance efficiency. So that's an issue that is kind of weedy, so to speak. It doesn't get a lot of airtime, but it is something that VPIRG is going to be working on, and I'm sure VNRC and other organizations as well, this coming legislative session, to actually go beyond what the federal government does on appliance efficiency. Look for more information coming from VPIRG on that in the next few weeks. We think there are some really exciting opportunities for Vermont to keep inefficient appliances off store shelves in Vermont and protect Vermont consumers from those added energy costs. So again, this is an issue that I do think is legitimate. There will be some impact on efficiency if you're driving down the functional price of electricity in the state. That being said, efficiency is something that our organizations are entirely committed to. We were successful in beating back an attempt by the Scott administration to slash Efficiency Vermont's budget by almost 10% this past budget cycle, and we'll continue to advocate for even more investment in efficiency going forward. The last note I'll make on this point, because it is a really important one, is that by electrifying our heating and transportation sectors, we're actually able to reduce total energy use. And when you look at things like the total energy study, which the state of Vermont did a couple of years ago, what they said very clearly is that traditional efficiency is very important, but another really important way to reduce total energy use is by moving to these newer, super efficient forms of electric use, like electric vehicles, like cold climate heat pumps. We've done the math, we've dug into it, and even when you take into account all of the inefficiencies in the electric system, which are getting better over time as we move towards renewable energy, you're reducing total energy use by switching from a fossil fuel heater to a cold climate heat pump, or from a internal combustion engine car to an electric vehicle. So it's definitely a marriage of both electrification and traditional electric efficiency that we need to invest in going forward.
And before I get to some other really good and important questions, I would also just say, to build on that, another piece of efficiency that I find to be really important is that this will help maximize and utilize our existing grid infrastructure, meaning that we can do more and get more out of the existing grid that we have, so that we can take advantage of cost savings and see some cost savings and financial benefit from tapping into and using our existing grid far more efficiently. So I would also say, we're getting a lot of questions. That a lot of these questions, most of these questions, will make their way into a frequently asked question chart. So we're going to do our best to continue to answer some of these questions and not leave you here too long. But keep your questions coming. We're keeping track of them, and we're going to do our best to answer them. So we have had some questions related to natural gas and how this policy might sort of incent the use of natural gas, spur the expansion of natural gas lines, and I think it's a really legitimate issue. And I don't know if, Ben, you want to take that?
Yeah, I can definitely dive into that one. Many of you probably know, probably not all of you, but I would imagine a number of you are aware of the fact that VPIRG spent quite a lot of time fighting the frac gas pipeline expansion. And obviously there were a lot of wonderful allies we had in that fight. I don't want to take credit for the partial victory that happened there. But there was a partial victory. We were able to prevent a pretty substantial portion of the transmission, the proposed gas transmission line that VGS proposed. So that I just mentioned that to say this is the issue of the life cycle emissions from gas and frac gas in particular, the need to prevent new fossil fuel infrastructure from being built, because we just can't afford to have that infrastructure used for the next decades or even over a century, which is the proposed lifespan for some of these facilities. We are 100% with you. Now, as it relates to ESSEX, so any price on carbon pollution that's looking at emissions at the burner tip as opposed to life cycle emissions has this basic problem baked in. And that, frankly, is true of every version of carbon pricing that has been discussed in any serious way in the United States. Now, is that a problem? Absolutely. However, we think it is critical to start somewhere. And the fact is, there are very clear-cut numbers that you can look at when you're talking about CO2 emissions and the actual combustion, the burning of fossil fuels for heating or for transportation inside a state's borders. When you start talking about life cycle emissions and how much methane may or may not have escaped in the extraction or transportation of a fuel, that just gets much trickier, and it adds an enormous layer of complexity to an already very difficult political discussion. So from our perspective, this is a big step in the right direction. It's not perfect. But then I would also say this plan actually, I think, and it's one of the reasons that while I was skeptical at first, I really came on board with this idea, is actually substantially better than any other version of carbon pricing on this issue that I've seen proposed. And that's because it reduces the price of clean electricity. And so if you have an oil or propane system now, and under this plan, you're looking at a gas system or an electric cold climate heat pump as your alternatives, the cold climate heat pump is going to be way cheaper than the gas system. So the fact that gas looks better relative to oil or propane is not nearly as important under this plan, because efficient electric options like cold climate heat pumps or geothermal become so much less expensive to operate. So I'm sure that is not a totally satisfactory answer for some folks on this webinar. I wish I could say we had the silver bullet, but I do think this plan's a big step in the right direction on that front. I'd also say, as it relates to gas, and then I think we can probably move on to another question. In the electric sector, there's definitely a lot of gas generation in the New England mix. That is absolutely true, and it's become more true over the recent years. That being said, Vermont has a renewable electricity standard, and if electric use goes up under this plan because of because of the heat pumps and because of the EVs, Vermont utilities would need to get more renewable electricity, and more small and mid-scale solar and wind would need to be built in the state of Vermont because of that growing load. So this is not a plan that we would support in most states. It's a plan that we do support in Vermont because of Vermont's strong renewable electricity requirement.
A few more technical questions. There are some questions here in terms of how to pay for the administrative costs, and how to ensure that the dollars raised don't get siphoned off in administrative expenses, et cetera, et cetera. Again, there needs to be an independent, deep economic analysis of this policy, but from what we can understand right now, and just to underscore that this is intended to build off the existing billing infrastructure that our utilities already are providing and using, and how they're billing their customers. So in all likelihood, the administrative costs would be very minimal, and in any ideally bill, they would be capped, at something within the order of $300,000 up to potentially $500,000, but a very small proportion would be used for administrative costs, ideally.
Let me very briefly on that just say, because of net metering, because every utility in Vermont has had to deal with bill credits for a very long time now, the electric utilities in Vermont know how to deal with this kind of thing. Not this thing specifically, but they've had to create billing systems that can handle on-bill credits. And the number of Vermonters that would be getting a check back in any given month would be fairly small. So would there be administrative costs? Yes, that's true of literally anything, but they would be, as Joey said, fairly minimal, because this uses existing infrastructure that the electric utilities have, and existing infrastructure that the tax department has on the revenue collection side.
And as we are nearing the 8 o'clock hour, not wanting to keep you for more than an hour, and hoping that this is the beginning of a deeper dive with you and others, maybe we will close with one of the most critical questions, I believe. And, you know, it speaks to the politics of this policy. A couple of folks are, you know, highlighting what we are abundantly aware of, which is, you know, Governor Scott has said he would veto any carbon tax or carbon pricing proposal. And one of the attendees writes that this will remain just a PowerPoint presentation until you get it passed and signed. Who's figuring that out? Good question. And I would say we are, with you, with others, with legislators and Vermonters, and even a governor who has said that he is supportive of our 90 by 2050 renewable energy goals, that he is committed to stepping in where the United States stepped out and stands alone in terms of abdicating our responsibility and our obligation to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement. We have a governor that has said that we are going to step in and step up and do what we need to do to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. I have not seen a policy to date or heard a solution that anyone has offered that doesn't have its unique challenges. I have not seen a policy to date, and I am open to it. I am one of the 21 members of the Governor's Climate Action Commission. I've gone to some of the public scoping sessions and participated in these commission hearings. And there are a lot of good ideas and good intentions that fall woefully short in terms of the policies that are going to be required to actually move the needle, to actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which actually means embracing the economic opportunities of the 21st century, which actually means being proactive in getting people off of fossil fuels, which actually means following rhetoric with substance. So in terms of the question that you're asking, what's it going to take to build the political will to make this a reality? It's going to take us. It's going to take you. It's going to take, yeah, you know, me. I'm sure you all have better things to do. You're joining us on a Monday evening. I wish I was kissing my 6-year-old goodnight, but I'm here talking with you good people because you care, and I actually want my 6-year-old to have a future. So that is what it's going to take. That's going to take you all joining with us and figuring out how do we ensure that we are having a fair conversation about the kinds of policies that are actually going to move us down the road where we need to go. Again, as we hope we have made a little clear, and there are still many good questions left unanswered, and we are looking forward to answering them with you. But I hope what we have made clear with articulating and walking through this particular policy with you is that we're really interested in finding a way that works for Vermont to do its part and to find the opportunities and, you know, our climate challenges that we face. And it's going to be really difficult, but it will be far more easy with folks like you standing up and demanding that we actually do take action, that we actually do a deep economic independent analysis of this policy or others, that we stop delivering rhetoric and follow up with substance. So really important question. And Ben, if I'm going to turn it over to you to close us out, and just want to say personally, thank you so much for lending your time this evening, answering your good questions. Many more unanswered. We'll put them in the frequently asked questions and just share with you our emails so that we can continue the conversation after tonight. Thanks again. Ben?
Thanks so much, Joey. I am not going to attempt to follow that up. When Joey gets fired up on climate, it's definitely fun to see. So I really appreciate the words that you said. I would just thank, echo Joey's thanks for all of you for joining us, and encouragement that you continue to join us to make this plan or a new, better version of it that has had your input a reality in the coming weeks and months, and hopefully not years, but we're in this for the long haul if that's what it takes. I'd also echo Joey's thanks for your good questions, and I mean that very sincerely. You have put a lot of very thoughtful questions out there. We were able to get to, I think, maybe about half of them, so I apologize for that. But we definitely will be putting together frequently asked questions in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And the kinds of questions that you're asking are the ones that we have frequently gotten. So they're going to make it into the frequently asked questions. So be on the lookout for that. And in the meantime, check out Energy Independent Vermont's website for that full 12, 13-page document that gets into some of the details that you're looking for, and continue to check back on our organizational Facebook pages and websites, and importantly, the Energy Independent Vermont Facebook page and email list. That's going to be your best bet to stay really up to date on what has being put out on this, as far as resources, as far as information, as far as progress. So thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to working with all of you on this in days to come.